Well, it's been about 3 years since you first got your leased vehicle, and COVID hit, and then we just sat inside for a long period of time, and people went online and looked at what kind of stuff they could buy and spend money on. And one of those things could have been a vehicle. And as you all may have noticed over the past few years, especially right after the pandemic hit, there was a large influx of American muscle cars and nice vehicles that ended up on the road. And a lot of those were leased vehicles. People had money and they wanted to spend it. Well, this year, over the next few months, and especially in this third quarter of 2023 that's upcoming, all these 3 year leases are going to be ending. And that is going to shock the supply side of the used car market. A lot of these people who have these 3 year leases that are coming to a close, they're either going to say, yes, I want to continue with this really high monthly payment, or they're going to say, you know what, I'm going to have to, because of how the economy has changed and how my own financial situation has changed accordingly, I'm going to have to turn this vehicle in. I want to wash my hands of it, and I'm going to have to get a lower end model because I can't afford this monthly payment anymore. And I'm also going to have to deal with this absurdly high interest rate, which is likely only going to get higher. So we're in this strange position, or a lot of people are, where they may also have to take into social considerations the perception. Okay, well, do I downgrade my car? And then people are going to, it's going to reflect on me inherently. And do I care? Because if I do, then I'm going to lock myself into a high monthly payment at a high APR to keep up the appearances.
That's a very wild game that we have been playing these last few years because we also have to keep in mind that plants shut down during the pandemic and we didn't have as much car production as we would have liked either. So we're going to have this wild used car market, it seems, where I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some great deals and we saw some absolutely horrendous deals. At the same time, you have occupations that I think like what you were hitting on there was very astute. We have occupations that you want to inspire confidence, not only inside your employees, but also like let's say inside your clients involving you and your ability. So you have certainly that pressure to keep up with the Jones and make sure that you look like you're on the up and up. I can see how this whole system would also shock just the idea of ownership altogether, where we are going to continue to shove off ownership in favor of rentals, not only for homes, but in vehicles. I know a lot of car manufacturers are trying to explore subscription options where you have your insurance and your car lease rolled into one payment, which is done through the company. And this kind of gives you that flexibility where you can kind of treat this car as a year long rental, so to speak. And you could actually like go in, you could trade it out for a different model and continue on about your day. So I'm very interested to see how these things are going because I don't think it's just going to last with the car market itself. I think we're seeing these effects all over the place. I think we're going to see companies doing that with, questionably owning locations. Are they going to just keep on renting from, leased out skyscrapers or buildings because they're unsure of how the remote work situation is going? We're going to see that with home ownership. Are we going to see this consistent trend of more rent, less own, despite new houses just exploding across the market? Who is to say? We were promised, hey, I was promised, and I want to get a little personal here. I was promised that I was going to have a housing market crash because, as a millennial, I'm actually pretty interested in affording one of these things one of these days. And I'm pretty disappointed I haven't seen one yet.
Very elusive. Well, I think that as it's just an analogy of it's a really big redwood oak, and it's going to take a lot of termites a long time before that tree falls. I think it will likely happen, but you're right. We have been essentially promised this, and yet here we are. Prices for houses are about the same as they were pre-pandemic levels. Interest rates are a lot higher, but people are not really panic selling the houses. I think that's one of the more difficult aspects of analysis with realty is houses don't really trade hands as fast as other commodities that people might own. Like cars, definitely, we can say trade hands faster than any sort of residence that people are living in. uh, there were so many points that you made that I'd like to comment on, such as yeah, if your boss like imagine if your boss the next day rolls into work with he used to drive a Lexus, now he just drives a Toyota, and then people are gonna maybe wonder, hell, is he doing all right? What's the trouble at home? um,
She took
and
everything in the divorce.
it's the couch life for me. And you're right with people renting all the time. I think that renting definitely and leasing is included in that. It has a place, and it's nice because many of us live mobile lifestyles, or they're very temporary as we transition around. But we eventually do want to like settle in. It seems like a lot of people that is like the ultimate goal. But if you never own equity in anything, then you're just kind of always paying somebody else to rent your own way of life. You're renting your vehicle, you're renting where you live, and so you don't really own much. And so if there's ever some sort of disruptive process, you're kind of hung out to dry and you don't have any assets to lean back on or anything that you can really sell. Like all of a sudden there's some, I don't know, massive medical expense, or both your parents are in a nursing home on the other side of the country, so that they can't live with you, and you still have to support them and like pay for their medical bills or their general care, and you really have nothing to sell, like because you've also been just kind of coasting paycheck to paycheck for your rents and your leases, which is just money that you're sending to somebody else to rent your own property. And these houses are just like out of control being made and raised, especially in like California. They are building so many, like you look at different work sites, a couple different people I watch on various social media or streaming website videos. Jeremiah Babe is one of them, where he walks around on construction sites that they're building just a new development, dozens or over 100 houses. They're like 700,000 to over $1 million a piece, and they are just so close to each other. You could pass your neighbor's sugar through the window. They're so close. You have no land, and I don't know who's going to pay like $750,000 just to live in this small area. And I think last month, 30% of contracts were canceled. So people said, "Yes, I'm going to buy this house when it's finished." And now 30% of people to back out of a deal is a large number. And if you keep having large numbers month over month, you have a lot of buyers that are no longer interested in moving. And all these realty companies or these construction companies are going to have to either slash prices dramatically because they're at a loss until they make some sort of profit. I just feel like we're the pressure cooker is building tons of pressure, but it's like the most massive pressure cooker that we can possibly imagine. That's like the entirety of realty. And it's so large that it can withstand a lot of pressure, but there's all these outside metrics of like unprecedented credit card debt, unprecedented credit card percentage rates that people are paying on balances that they're carrying month per month, unprecedented numbers of defaults on car payments. They're either late by a new number of days or they're late by a new number of months. And the number of car repossessions across the United States has been increased, and people are paying more for food. People are being laid off. Just this month, March, multiple states have slashed the food benefits from the EBT. If you're on like a food stamp equivalent program, you no longer get the extra bonus that was they implemented it during COVID, and it finally ended this month. I think it's like $80 to $90 per month, which I think the median income in the United States is just over $30,000. So uh, that amount of money for families, if you take away $90 per month from them, that can be quite impactful. And people, I also personally, my own opinion, people lack certain discipline. They can't say no. They don't know how to cut the phone bill. So they're going to have their food bill reduced by 90%, or not their bill, but their assistance reduced by $90. Well, they're not going to lower their phone bill. They're not going to say, you know what, I don't need 20 gigabytes of data. I'm going to go down to 15 or 10. They won't do that. They're simply most likely going to buy cheaper food, which is not the correct thing to do. They're going to buy, nutrient empty food. They're going to buy more sugary food because it's cheaper. And all of these things are ultimately going to, it's not good in the long run. You got to play the long game, especially with what you're putting into your body. You need, if anything, if you're going to spend money anywhere, please consider that it be food, because it's going into your body. You are grabbing those components. You're going to make structural components. That's going to be your energy. It's everything. I mean, why would you build a skyscraper out of the cheapest crap that you can? That's not a good idea. So all of these come together as a domino effect, but there's like 25 dominoes. And where does it lead? I have no idea, but something has to break in the system, it seems, especially if it's going to cost $400,000 for a single missile to hit a balloon. And that's just the cost of the missile, not jet fuel, not ATC, air traffic command and control doing all these things. Like the number of people involved, the brass involved, the communication. I just like, I feel like there's so many expenses that are occurring that we are just somehow either blind to or willfully ignoring. And I have no idea where all this is going, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be good.
Well, I do appreciate your intuition there for sure at the end because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there is a fundamental cost to spending the public funds when we don't have any. Like there's an extra cost of going into debt, which is provided obviously through interest, but like not only that, but you're also eating up the opportunity cost of using that funds, for other purposes. So like there's just a multitude of effects that occur from overspending and overspending consistently because I actually kind of liked how you almost tied together there the EBT, the individual who, the individual of lesser means who does not have, let's say, the financial discipline to uh, remedy their own, lifestyle, and the U.S. government being pretty much the same character.
Yeah, like are they more likely to cut two streaming services and save, let's say, $50 a month and then eat the same quality of food, or are they just gonna buy a lower end fruit drink or so-called fruit drink because it's just sugar and syrup that tastes sort of like fruit but is actually just giving them diabetes and destroying their endocrine system? And the downstream effects of eating garbage, I don't think can be underscored enough,
Well, I think
because
it's
you
actually an interesting metaphor as well because, like, when we're talking about fiat, fake money being introduced into the system, flowing through, we're seeing all the downstream effects of this. Uh, like the whole point of having a limited supply of cash is that you're not fooling around with the price mechanism that arises from the natural trading tendencies and desires of people. When you have prices in a system, that's information that's being traded across. People have agreed to sell these things at these prices, and people have accepted those prices in order to buy them. So when you introduce a bunch of fake money into the system, you're adding all of this like new competition. It's distorting real value. It's creating small booms and busts all across the economy, all across the different commodity sectors, and eventually everything will loop around into real estate because real estate, again, being a fixed quantity, you'll start seeing the changes there rapidly, like we're doing now. Just within a few years, I remember seeing a statistic not too long ago. It was like the median amount of income per household to buy a home was around 77,000 in the US. And just within 3 years, from pre to post pandemic, it jumped up to over 100,000 median per household. So that is a tremendous jump. In order to afford a house in the United States, to have the median income of around 100,000 is quite frankly insane, especially when we know that the median income in the United States is, like what you were talking about before, it's anywhere between like 35 and 50, depending on who's doing the study. Still, with a dual income household, you are barely looking at crossing that threshold.
And you
So,
need that dual income, two parents that work all day so they can afford the house that they don't spend any time in.
absolutely. And neither do the kids because they're out in school and daycare and all that kind of stuff. So, uh, which is really unfortunate too, because you're also looking at rent prices converging on that mortgage price too. You're seeing more or less. It's not always clear if renting and owning is the right move in what market or for what part of people's lives. It is usually a very close game, nonetheless. What we can do though is that we could talk about the basic economics of what would cause a price drop to begin with. What would cause that sort of shift in the market? We know that
Well, I
it would
have.
have to. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you're good. I have two things to say about that, and one of them was the city of Seattle. So if you want to build a second house, you have to pay $77,000. So there's this video by Steve Leto, who's an attorney, also on YouTube, and the case was about this family, and they wanted to build a second house for their children. And then the city of Seattle said, no problem, just pay us $77,000 first for the right to build the house. And then you can pay all your money for all the permits and the building materials and actually build the house. So it's a very large disincentive to build homes, which artificially constrains the supply. If just to begin, the upfront cost that doesn't go towards your house is $77,000. Like, imagine it's like, okay, I'm going to go buy a car. And they say, yeah, no problem. Before you start any of this process, it's actually going to cost you $25,000. And you're like, well, I was actually going to buy a car for less than that. So I'm not in the market anymore. You have that. And then I was actually going to pose a question to you. Do you think, or what do you think about large companies and or especially foreign entities buying property from farmlands to houses in the United States? I heard that there was a bill that was being passed, or not being passed, being inspected, discussed, where they would try to limit the number of houses or the number of acreage or something like that that large companies like BlackRock could procure, because it seems like they're in a position where they have large amounts of capital as well as debt instruments that they could just be approved for massive debt, no matter how high the risk. And then if there's some sort of downturn or even a crash, that they would be able to scoop up all of these houses and essentially take advantage of the market. And then with each recovery, they slowly consolidate the percentage and they have more and more of the pie chart. And eventually, if that plays out enough, then no single family can ever really own houses. It's just we become the nation of renters. So I was wondering what you thought about. I certainly am against like other foreign countries purchasing property in the United States, besides like room for an embassy? Like, why would China be allowed to buy large amounts of land of our farmland in the U.S.? I don't think that I think that that's a national security issue.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree. Let me address both of those things real quick because the first one, when we're talking about Seattle, let's say, and there's like this, right to build problem where, instinctively, I think people kind of look at that and they're like, okay, that sounds about right. We want to disincentivize rich people from being able to just keep buying up land inside these cities in order to prevent them from just, having a monopoly on this sort of high value land that should be, in all practical purposes, open to the public. But the hilarious thing is that only rich people are the ones who have the funds to build the homes in the first place. That doesn't mean that they're going to keep them forever. I think it's strange that they have to have the $77,000 up front, especially when you consider that the fact of them owning and building a new home will generate property tax for the city anyway. So I find that a little counterintuitive. Um, it looks mainly just to prevent the supply of housing in the cities, and that's usually done to artificially inflate the prices of homes. Because the more homes that you're built, the more supply you have, then the more choices people have, um, and you get a better sort of balance between supply and demand in that way. However, when we look at it on the grand scale, the sort of pressure cooker, as you alluded to before, the Yellowstone volcano of real estate in the United States. That's cooking. Um,
Yeah, I like that. That's a good description.
I also see these sorts of issues coming ahead. Now, the real dream, which again seems like it was promised to us at some point in time, was the fact that remote work was going to take over, and then people would like to move to more desirable places, not always more expensive places, but desirable in terms of cost of living. So we should have expected things in areas of the country where you wouldn't normally see activity all of a sudden start to generate activity. Like you could say, like the Dakotas, even in places like, oh, I don't know, Nebraska, um, just places that historically have had lower housing prices than the major metropolitan areas. But instead, interestingly enough, we saw more of a move towards um, the higher densely populated areas again. So even though it was away from New York and California, it still hit major population areas like Texas and Florida. Now, a lot of people can say that that's due to the unique politics of the area, sure, fine. But what still remains is that people are still going to where activity is happening. They're not kind of spreading out like we thought they were. People still want to go where the jobs are. And in that case, even if the jobs are hybrid, they would like to still be around that area in order to have that income be used locally for, a better living experience, let's say. So to address the second point, I mean, obviously, it's a gigantic security issue, I would say, to have any foreign entity, especially something like China, where you can't say that it's just national foreign investment because we know that Chinese companies are just owned by their government. There is no real distinction between them. So it's different from like a company in France coming over and being like, hey, we want to buy this factory and we want to manufacture, our pottery goods here in the United States. That's a type of foreign investment that happens all the time. And there's usually no problem with it. I mean, we have American car companies being made in Mexico and China and Canada, wherever, have you. And then you also have like Toyota and Kia being manufactured here in the United States. So there's always been this like crisscross hybridization. In fact, a lot of people say that direct foreign investment in an economic context is actually a very like healthy marker at saying that people like your society because they want to invest into it. Now, if it's something like farmland, then yeah, we do definitely have a problem. So again, you have, I think you have like this double problem when it just particularly involves states like China, where there really is no distinction between the public and private enterprise. Um, Otherwise, I would say that the if we take those larger corporations, BlackRock, for example, the big bad, I think a lot of people are used to these days, or even like Berkshire Hathaway, which I also think it's interesting that a lot of people don't lump those together because that's another like major real estate. You know, what's the word I'm looking for? Monger, real estate monger. But yeah, I mean, like I am concerned about us turning into a nation of renters. The reason why we would turn into a nation of renters, though, has to directly do with the economics of our money supply, because you can almost look at it as if money in our country can be printed on demand and there's no consequence for this, then your system becomes agnostic to the money supply. And so you'll have the same sort of mechanisms. Just kind of imagine in your head, though, something like, okay, so that money has to go somewhere. Instead of thinking of it like being trickled down, like they used to talk about in the 80s, so, trickle down economics, as long as you make the rich people well off, then everyone else will be well off. No, think of it as like the rich people have like these giant buckets, more or less, and that just through all of their different ownership mechanisms, they're able to collect all the runoff money that's going everywhere. This service, if you're paying $7 to Disney, it's going into that bucket. If it's paying $5 for McDonald's, it's going into that bucket. The rich people more or less are at the bottom, but with these giant buckets collecting all the cash that's raining down, if that makes more sense. So I think people kind of have this inversion of how the money system works. So, like I said, it almost doesn't matter the supply of money at that point in time, then, because you still have that sort of function being completed. So, you have people spending money at businesses, and those businesses eventually have that sort of collective. If you spend it at McDonald's, that money goes to the franchise, which eventually goes to the franchise owner. And so they're just sitting there collecting all the money. The problem is that because velocity of money is very important in these calculations, when you have essentially a system that's agnostic of money supply itself, then velocity becomes your main determinant in how well people are off or not. So because rich people will be able to make more money faster than poor people, they'll be able to do things with that money faster than poor people, because it takes them a different amount of time to save up for $100,000. If you're making $1 million a month, I mean, obviously it would be a lot faster to make $100,000 than the guy who makes $70,000 a year. So once you have that money, you're able to do so much more with it. So you have to like almost get comfortable with the system of like how a system that was geared for growth was also geared for deception. Like, let's not lie about this. Nixon took us off the gold standard because he was doing terrible with his economics. He was doing terrible running this country. And he had to figure out some way to make sure that we can cheat on our on all the money that we owed due to
Yeah.
Vietnam. So, there's all sorts of like character act, like, it's because he was under this tremendous pressure that he did something so radical that really upset the way that our entire economics sort of function. He's not the only one. He's definitely put the final tear into the fabric, but these things were started early on in the century with Woodrow Wilson, the creation of the central banks, FDR taking us off silver. There's all of these players that throughout this period of time were like leading to this giant problem where we're going to have rich people with so much money they have no idea what to do with, and poor people who can't afford basic things like food, cars, homes, things that we have gotten used to in our welfare calculation since the 1950s in this country. So I am definitely afraid that we would become a nation of renters, because I don't think that the government is going to allow those giant corporations to fail. if they were able to fail, we could actually see a housing crisis that would provide us with, a return to a little bit of a stabilization in prices. But I have this terrible feeling that they're not going to allow it.
And speaking of calculations, I think we can send some credit over to France and Germany. They were the ones that were running some numbers, and they thought, I don't think that America has the gold to back the amount of money that they owe us. And then they both sent some warships to the US to redeem the money for gold, as was the law when we were gold backed. They said, you know what, we want all this in gold. And then because of that, we had been cooking the books and distributing more money than we had gold to back it up. Then we're like, okay, well, the only way out of this is to remove ourselves from the gold standard. So they exposed the problem. Um, and here we are.
Absolutely. And we have the Pentagon failing audits. We have the Federal Reserve not performing audits on Fort Knox. So we, obviously it feels like we are a nation of crooks at this point in time. And whether or not you're forced to play this game, more or less, because it's like fundamentally on shaky foundations. So everyone
And
has to
it
kind of backstab each other.
it sure is just one giant game. I mean, BlackRock, or sorry, Blackstone defaulted a couple days ago on a $562 million bond backed by a portfolio of offices and stores. And do you mean to tell me that they don't have the money to pay that? They had, it's a lot of money. They could pay it, but it's more strategic to just default on it. And they're
Correct.
allowed to take these huge risks and just write it off. And if they want to play that game long enough, and we bailed out the airplane industry, we bailed out the auto industry, we bailed out um what do we got? Banks, the banking industry. I mean, it's kind of crazy that we gave them, especially banks, like we give them all this money. They pay us, 0.01%, and then they turn around and invest that money. And then if you take a loan from them, they'll charge you 5 to 10%, maybe even higher, to rent that money essentially. And they're lending out money at a leverage, right? Because of the way that fractional reserve banking works. They're lending out 15 times, sometimes even higher than what they even have. Like, hey, I have $100. Okay, well, I can rent out 15 times that at a higher interest rate, than flip the uh, the account holder a few cents. If you've actually calculated how much money you make per interest per month, or over a year's course to report on your taxes, I mean, you might make a few dollars on thousands of dollars. So they do all that. They invest all this money. That how many people have a bank account? A lot of people. And these places still can't find a way to make money. It's literally, we're giving them money. They have free capital to invest. They still can't get it right. They default, and then the taxpayer bails them out and
Oh, on
gives them
top of
even more
that, their
money.
CEOs that fucked all this stuff up get to leave the company on a golden parachute with stock options and all this shit.
It's really crazy, man. And now there's, talk of a bail in, and I can't remember when, but the government did kind of, it's always on the down low, doesn't get a lot of press coverage, where they just wrote down that hey, we're allowed to do this. We authorize ourselves to perform a bail in if required. And the bail in would be basically everybody that has an account with a bank, we're going to give them a 4% haircut, give them a 10% haircut, and just take money out of their account because the banks are too big to fail and we need them to survive. So everybody just kind of gets to distribute this burden and just pay their fair share
Right, which is,
instead of.
like we said, it's a fundamental lie. It's like you need to have these things die off. You need to have these things break up and break down. It's the whole point of the market system is that if something doesn't work, you let it die. Then you can move on to something else. You can build something else.
Ah, free market economics you speak of.
Yeah, I wish conservatives cared about that shit nowadays. Maybe we can get somewhere if they weren't perpetuating the same fraud. I mean, like, let's not forget, and I will make this an important point, that Richard Nixon was a Republican, right? What did George Bush do anything relatively financially conservative while he was in the presidency? No. The only one that we've seen to have was, you could claim, Reagan, but even then, that's really debatable because we have all sorts of other shenanigans that were introduced into the system. Like, how much farther along would we be if the drug war wasn't started and we are able to tax all those different forms of commodities? So, I think we definitely have to. I think the instinct here is like, oh, we need financial responsibility. Let's look at the Republicans. I just kind of also want to put a little ear bug into people's audio sense that they haven't done shit for the last 100 years or so, and I wouldn't expect anything new out of them in the upcoming foreseeable future. Let's not
All
forget that Trump
roads,
was the one who authorized all of these payments to begin with, too. Like, yeah, Biden made it worse, but Trump definitely started to implement drastic inflationary procedures in the beginning of the pandemic. That this is the end consequence of what's going on. Shit has become ridiculously expensive, and if you're not on the you know top end of society, where you can just allow things to go by you without much notice because you're comfortable in the way that you're living, then this is how we'll have perpetuating problems. And if you see more crime in the streets, it's like, well, sometimes people get fed up with this shit.
I think some parts of California, the police department has officially declared they will not respond to certain calls. What that means, I'm not sure, but a lot of those police departments have basically said in these words or in similar words, expect to be robbed. And they said, don't even leave a bottle in your car because people may break your windows to take the bottle to go get the 5 or 10 cent return on it. Just it's just a really crazy situation in many big cities, especially in California. But just with the amount of violence everywhere, and the government's only real goal is that all roads lead to more control for them and higher taxes for you. And yet the problems don't really seem to be solved, and doesn't really seem like they're making headway on them either. It's not like, oh, we can see clear progress here. It does not seem like that is the trend. Um, and it does
I
not
want
seem like,
people
go ahead.
I want people to know just how important it is that we have access to things like vehicles and homes. If you lose these two fronts in the general welfare of your society, you will have major problems going forward. You can't have the median individual in a society that's supposed to perpetuate freedom and the ability to be a self-made individual, by forcing them into a paradigm in which they must rent consistently from undefeatable corporate entities that are immune to market pressures.